Hello again and welcome to another edition of Southern Country. Hi, I'm Herb Southern and welcome to the show, my friends. We're in Westchester, Pennsylvania today at the Helicopter Museum, and we're going to find out what makes the helicopters work. Pauline's here. How you doing?
Fine, Herb. Thanks for having me again.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Andrew, how you doing?
Good.
Okay. Bob is here. He's going to take us on a tour through the museum. But first, Michael has some questions for Bob.
Bob, how long has this museum been here, and how many people do you get up to a year?
Well, the museum opened up in 1996. However, we just purchased this building that it was housed in last year due to a very generous gift by Frank Robinson, the owner of Robinson Helicopters. The museum has about 30,000 visitors a year.
Okay, that sounds like quite a few people walking through this door. Tell you what, we're going to walk through the door and see what's inside. Bob, we're standing in front of a rotor mast. Tell us the purpose of the rotor mast and what it does to a helicopter.
Well, the rotor mast is responsible for lifting and lowering the helicopter as well as steering. This display is really a instructional tool. We use it to show the action of the blades once the controls that are actually in a helicopter are worked on. And there are two main controls that we concern ourselves with in helicopters. One is the cyclic stick, which is in the pilot's right hand, and it's used for steering purposes. And what it does is actually tilt the rotors into the direction that the pilot wants to go. You tilt it forward, the blades tilt forward, as you can see by the action of moving the cyclic stick here. Now, the second control is the collective, and what that does is make the helicopter go up and down. That's simulated by, well, I'll turn this back on. That's simulated by this other control, which, as you can see, collectively works on all of the blades. It, when pushed up, it makes the helicopter rise, and when pushed down, and it's usually held in the pilot's left hand, when it's pushed down, it'll make the helicopter descend. And those are the two primary controls of helicopters.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bob, now this is an interesting tail rotor. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Well, it's not well known, but the reason helicopters have tail rotors is that if they did not, the body of the helicopter would turn around in an opposite direction to the main rotor, and that effect is called torque. Every machine has it, including helicopters. So what this does is counteract that torque and keep the body of the helicopter in straight flight. It's very important, and if the helicopter were to lose this, I think you've seen various footages of helicopters that have lost their tail rotor, and they go into this spiral, and it's thoroughly uncontrollable. So basically, this keeps the fuselage straight, and it's a very important element. It's controlled, by the way, by the two pedals that are in the cockpit, if you were wondering about that. But a very important piece of equipment on the helicopter.
Well, what about this piece? This is very unique, this round circular piece going around.
Yes, it's actually meant to protect the rotor, because sometimes pilots do have a tendency to come in and stop themselves by lifting the fuselage up. There would be a danger that they would hit the tail rotor and again go into that uncontrollable spin. So this was meant as a barrier or a guide to prevent them from doing that.
Okay. And another word for body is fuselage.
Fuselage,
Got
yes,
it.
yes.
Okay.
Bob, this one has no
Tail rotor.
Tail rotor. Why?
Well, as I said, the helicopters have tail rotors because the engine turns the rotor blades on most craft. In this case, the propulsion for the blades are actually coming from the exhaust gas of the engine being channeled out the tips of the blades. And when that is done, there is no torque that's developed, and therefore you don't need a tail rotor to counteract the torque.
Who designed this one?
This is actually a French model. Even though we are the American Helicopter Museum, we gave a little credit to the French.
Are they in use?
Actually, not anymore.
Okay.
The amount of power that you can get from an engine like this really constrains the size of the craft. So it was a nice technology. It worked, but it's not in great use today.
What year?
Oh, this goes back to the 50s and early 60s.
Okay.
Bob's going to share with us some educational aspects of the museum as well as some other features of the museum. And before we get started, Andrew has a question.
Bob, can kids have birthday parties here?
Oh, sure. Kids have a lot of parties here. It's one of our most popular programs. For a very slight fee, you can rent the snack bar or the picnic area out back, invite up to 15 children and 15 adults, and have a great time with your refreshments and food in our snack bar. So in answer to your question, yeah, and they have a lot of fun. Now, as far as the educational programs that we have for the museum, we have some preset programs that we host in our theater. And it usually begins with a little discussion about helicopters and then moves on to one or more films about helicopters depending on the age group. And we do quite a lot of education on the floor of the museum itself. You'll see some children behind me learning the controls. We have a guide staff that circulates among our patrons and actually explains on the fly what the various controls do in our helicopters. So that's one of our primary missions, is education at the museum.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Well, my friends, we're wrapping up this show at the Helicopter Museum in West Chester, Pennsylvania. Pauline, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Herb. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you, Bob, to you.
It was my pleasure.
Okay, and we're actually, it's this part of the show where Bob's going to reveal to us the surprise he's been holding out.
Now, the thing I promised earlier in the day when we were looking at the autogyro was that 60 years after the autogyro was developed, we're back to square one. We actually have a craft at the museum that is part helicopter, part fixed wing, and that is the Osprey that the kids have just boarded. The Osprey holds about 24 soldiers, can travel at about 360 miles an hour, and lift about 20,000 pounds. It's the newest development in helicopters, and yet, as I stated, it's still a return to square one in having both a helicopter and an airplane together in the same craft. And we're the only museum on the face of the earth that has one.
Well, it's quite an invention. Quite an invention.
Yes, it is.
What's your website?
Our website is www.helicoptermuseum.org.
Hours of operation?
We're open to the public from Wednesday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. On Sunday, however, we open at 12 o'clock noon.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you once again for being a great host, Pauline.
Yeah, thank you very much, Herb.
Okay, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.